Final Fantasy IV is a game that has had so many ports and remakes to so many platforms, but anyway, now we have the Pixel Remaster version. Like Final Fantasy V, much of its source material is based on the GBA version, except without many of the new exclusive features from said version. One of my main complaints with this game was that it was incredibly easy too, but of course I was using all 5 of my characters. So let's say I don't use any party members in battle except the main character Cecil.
Cecil? Cecil! Cecil?
Cecil? Well, Cecil it is. Thank you, voice acting. Can I win? Well, sure, probably. But let's add an extra handicap. Can I do it with no items in battle? Besides equipment, of course. Maybe. This means Cecil is only going to be allowed to heal himself with his own magic and only attack with his own equipment. No items that cast spells or things like potions can be used unless he can equip them. Here are the rules. I can only control Cecil in battle. Party members can't do anything to enemies or heal Cecil. They can either defend or KO themselves. Unfortunately, having conscious party members is unavoidable in some fights because the game assumes I want to use all of them. Next, if Cecil dies a non-scripted death, I have to reload his save. Next, no items in battle except equipment and the crystal. And lastly, no major glitches. Let's begin. Starting off as a scripted battle of Cecil versus some enemies. This opening cutscene is really long and unskippable. The first real boss fight is luckily just a few minutes into the game, but as you'd expect with a first boss fight, this fight is trivial. Simply attack when the mist dragon is visible, don't attack when it isn't, rinse and repeat, and then it'll eventually go away. Next we meet Rydia, and Rydia understandably is not happy with us for murdering her mother and destroying her home, so she launches us into space. But that's okay, because after we fight an easy boss fight against some soldiers who want to take Rydia away, Rydia completely forgives us, because plot. We meet Tella. His gimmick is that he can immediately use all the mid-level black and white magic spells. This is good at first, but he's stuck at 90 MP with mediocre stats which, while fine at first, becomes a complete liability towards the mid-game. Anyway, we can't use him in battle, so he gets to take a nap with Rydia while Cecil fights the next boss. By the way, I'm not outright banning out of battle healers, but I don't expect to need them that often because of how cheap items are, and they don't need MP. Anyway, Octomammoth is weak to Cecil's dark sword, so we have a pretty easy time beating him. Just attack a few times and then he'll go away. Tella then decides to beat up Edward, and after storming off to fight Golbez, Edward joins the team. Edward is pretty infamous for being a pretty bad party member. In this game, he'll also automatically hide when he has low HP. I don't really get it. I guess it's to show he's a coward. While his ability as a bard gets some actual utility in the 3D remake, even then it's not very good. He sucks. We then have to slay a wild animal in its home while it's protecting its nest. Sure, the Antlion counters, but its attacks are pretty weak, so it's no big deal. Moving on. Edward now has to 1v1 an enemy in the scripted battle, and it takes so long because his harp does about as much damage as you think a harp would do. I guess if he played it loudly and badly enough, it might do damage. Can a harp even do that? Moving on. Later we fight Mom Bomb. The first part of this battle puts us into a party of only Yang, but this is scripted and he alternates between kick and attack. We eventually get thrown into the real fight. Mom Bomb will explode after a few turns, doing heavy damage. Cecil can easily tank it, but the remaining bombs do so much damage from their self-destructs if you don't beat them fast enough. Luckily, Cecil has the Darkness ability, which, at the cost of around 1/8 of Cecil's max HP, Cecil can attack everyone with half damage. This doesn't work like spells, which distributes the damage. It's actually the same thing as him attacking everyone else individually for half damage. And with that, Cecil can beat everyone, however, he KOs himself because he takes so much damage, and as per our rules, that's a loss. I did consider grinding, but then after testing out Darkness a bit more, I found out Cecil can use Darkness from the back row without a damage penalty. That means he'll take heavily reduced damage from the bomb's regular attacks, allowing him to outlast them easily, and with that, Mom Bomb is Mom gone. Oh man, that's 2 moms Cecil has murdered in this game. Actually 3 if you include the Antlion. Jeez, they don't call him a Dark Knight for nothing. We now have to defend the castle of Fabul. Just back row and hit auto battle and watch as the game plays itself. Then after the plot happened, we lose our entire party except Cecil and are stranded at Mysidia where everything started. After getting Palimporum and Tella, we have to climb Mount Ordeals to make Cecil a paladin. However, on the way we encounter lots of zombies, and Cecil being a Dark Knight can't do much damage to them. It seems he'll always do 1 damage with regular attacks, meaning he has to use Darkness or get critical hits to actually damage them for any meaningful amount. I just skip these fights as, while they're beatable, they take way too long. We then enter a fight against Scarmiglione, the first elemental lord. He is accompanied by 4 Skullnuts, which, like all other zombies, take only 1 damage from our attacks. Fortunately, I don't need to kill any of them, since they'll automatically leave the battle when Scarmiglione goes away, and Scarmiglione takes full damage. However, Scarmiglione counters all attacks with Thunder, and after all of the drain attacks, Cecil just doesn't have the HP to do it. I re-attempt at level 30 and it was barely enough. He then re-challenges Cecil, and since he doesn't counter with Thunder in the second fight, Cecil can just attack him from the back row, taking all of 31 damage. Nice! Once Cecil becomes a paladin, we have to fight Dark Knight Cecil in a scripted battle. Because Cecil changed classes, he resets to level 1, and as a result, all of his stats go down. However, his HP stat, while lower, is still pretty good, allowing us to tank the Dark Knight's attacks until the scripted battle ends. We have a few boss fights up ahead, and at level 1, we have to grind, like, now. I decided to back row train at Mount Ordeal since even despite being at such a low level, we can actually do real damage to the undead. After a few minutes, Cecil ends up being so much stronger than he was as a Dark Knight. As a paladin, Cecil also gets access to low-level and mid-level white magic, allowing him to heal himself in battle. This will be useful later, but right now he kinda sucks as a healer. More importantly, Cecil also now gets access to tons more equipment as well as better stats than Dark Knight Cecil just after a few levels. Upon arriving at Baron, we get to fight Yang. Well, first we have to fight the soldiers. They counter Cecil's attacks with Mini. Having Mini negates Cecil's attack and defense, allowing the soldier to do over 400 damage to Cecil per hit, while Cecil's only able to do 1 damage, so I decide to have Cecil back row this fight with a bow so he at least takes less damage from their attacks. They'll use Mini even if Cecil already has it, thus undoing the effect, so wasting time casting Esuna doesn't make sense. Cecil can just attack over and over and eventually get the win. Then for Yang, we just hit him a few times until we convince him to rejoin our party. Moving on. After that, we have to face Baigan at Baron Castle, who turned into a monster. I try taking out his arms, but he just regenerates them, so I try going for the body instead, only to be stun locked by Constrict. That's not good. The solution is pretty obvious. Take out the left arm, the arm that uses Constrict, and then just attack the body repeatedly, ignoring his attack since Baigan will only regenerate his arms if he loses both of them. Much better. We then get to fight Cagnazzo. He's the next Elemental Lord and he's a bit tougher. His Tsunami attack does good damage and he'll start healing himself later in the battle for a lot of HP every turn. He's weak to Thunder, but we can't exploit this until later in the game when we get the Thunder Arrow. We'll just have to fight him normally. Luckily, the earlier training paid off, allowing Cecil to outdamage his heals, and with that, the Elemental Turtle is no more. Unfortunately, while we gain Sid, we lose Palom and Porum because we're not allowed to have more than 5 party members. I mean, it's because plot. Moving on. Next we have to fight the Dark Elf. Getting to Dark Elf is a lot more tedious than actually fighting him since we can't equip any metallic equipment, meaning we take a lot of damage due to having bad armor. But once we make it to Dark Elf, since it's intended to be a forced loss, equipping Cecil with his full gear and making the fight end instantly is better here. Once we really fight him, it's a little tricky. He'll first attack with some medium level spells, and then drop Cecil's HP to single digits with Tornado, then use Hex to turn Cecil into a pig, which will prevent us from using Kira to heal off the damage. I decide to just go for the kill after he uses Hex, and while having the pig status disables healing, we still have enough raw HP to tank 1 attack, and that seems to be enough, and with that the elf is dead. The Magus Sisters block the way for Cecil to save Rosa, so we have to deal with them. They are programmed to use their Delta attack, which is just Reflect followed by mid-level spells on Cindy, bouncing it to your party. To make things trickier, Sandy will still use Reflect even when Cindy has Reflect, bouncing the Reflect onto a random party member and thus preventing you from healing them directly. This doesn't really matter since Cecil can just use Kira on Cindy, and since he's the only one alive, it'll always bounce Kira to him, allowing him to out-heal the attacks. Eventually the sisters are no more. Next, Tella decides to 1v1 Golbez, but then he dies of old age. Kane and Rosa then join the party. Next is the third Elemental Lord, Barbariccia. Barbariccia takes reduced damage while spamming me with a message telling me to use Kane's jump attack, and she counters. This is gonna be slow. Cecil doesn't learn any damaging spells, thus he's stuck not doing much damage to her. I could get the Dancing Dagger, which can cast spells, but it only has 40 attack, which is probably worse than whatever Cecil could do with his sword. She also has some annoying attacks like Ray, which petrifies members, and while it's gradual petrification, which doesn't do anything by itself, if she keeps using Ray, it will become full petrification, and so it needs to be healed off with Esuna before it gets to that point. I eventually get lucky with a fight and Barbariccia is no more. Next is Calcabrina. Without a multi-hitting move, it is impossible to beat the regular dolls since clearing either all of the Calca or all of the Brina summons Calcabrina. Calcabrina can also stun lock you with hold, which gets annoying, and if you take too long, Calcabrina can separate into dolls again, resetting the fight. Eventually I managed to get the luck I needed after a few attempts. We immediately fight Golbez, the main antagonist of the game. Everything has been building up to this epic boss fight, and it's already over. No, seriously, Golbez is a joke. Next boss fight is Dr. Lugae. All he does is spam poison and sleep, and then he explodes. And then he explodes again. And then Yang explodes. And then Sid explodes. This is a good game. Moving on. Next we meet Edge, and he decides to 1v1 Rubicante, the final Elemental Lord, and Rubicante responds with the RPG equivalent of a bitch slap. Edge, now utterly cucked, joins our team. We now have to fight Edge's parents, who were turned into monsters by Dr. Lugae. This is a scripted fight though, and all they do is cast a few weak spells before going away. We now have to fight the final Elemental Lord, Rubicante. He does a truckload of damage with Inferno, which Cecil can barely out-heal, but he doesn't have any other tricks like the other Archfiends. He just attacks, and that's good enough for me. Moving on. I decide to challenge optional boss Asura. After all, I came all the way here to get the rat tail so I can get Excalibur, Cecil's next big weapon upgrade. I spent a while attacking her normally, and yeah, her counterattacks do too much damage. I tried putting Cecil in the back row, but he couldn't outdamage her 3000 plus HP heals while maintaining his own HP. Then I noticed I had the mute arrow in my inventory. This arrow does extra damage to mages, and while she is immune to silence, does the mute arrow still do extra damage to her? Surely enough, the killer bow and mute arrow in the wrong slots again. Cecil deals around 4000 damage per hit, which is more than she heals every few turns. This makes the fight incredibly trivial. While we're here, I decide to challenge Leviathan. His tidal wave does big damage, and he follows them up with Blizara, which does pretty good damage too, but equipping a flame mail with a cursed ring, while it will drop my stats by a lot, will also cause Blizaras to be absorbed instead of damage, and combined with Cura will restore pretty much all damage taken from tidal wave. And with that, Cecil has single-handedly defeated the king and queen of summons. I then fought Demon Wall. Demon Wall mainly just does some weak attacks and then he dies, or crumbles. I think I overprepared here since this battle has a time limit and I thought it'd be to the wire, but I guess not. While we're on the moon, I attempted Bahamut, but it didn't go well. Even at level 72, Cecil barely survives 1 Mega Flare with only a sliver of HP. I can stretch it to 2 Mega Flares if I equip the right items, but even this just isn't enough time. I'll have to come back later. Fusoya then temporarily joins our party. He has access to pretty much every spell in the game, but most of his stats don't get better when he levels up, so he's pretty much just another Tella. We then get to fight all the Elemental Lords back to back. You might think 1v4 is pretty bad, but there's actually only one Archfiend I'm worried about, Barbariccia. Everyone else has some sort of weakness which can be exploited pretty easily. I can even have Cecil equip a bow and back row to reduce damage from the first 2 Elemental Lords. However, Barbariccia now has Maelstrom, which drops you down to single digits, and she'll usually follow it up with the standard attack. So it doesn't really matter how much HP I have left after beating Cagnazzo, because I'll just have less than 10 HP anyway. I tried and tried for so long, so I grinded all the way up to level 86 and equipped as much evasion boosting equipment as possible. Eventually I got the luck I needed and Barbariccia missed all of her attacks, so I managed to beat her and move on to Rubicante. Rubicante is basically a victory lap. I go and equip the Ice Brand and absolutely wipe the floor with him, doing massive damage per hit. Next is the CPU. The CPU's attack node does pretty good damage, eating exactly 10% of Cecil's HP every turn rounded down, and thus giving him only 11 turns. And Cecil's strength is barely high enough to defeat the CPU and defense node, but not the attack node unless we get 2 really lucky rolls. We unfortunately can't kill the attack node because the CPU will just object 99 Cecil, doing 9,999 damage. Luckily, if I equip the right gear, Cecil's spirit stat can be barely high enough to outheal the lasers, allowing him to kill the defense node, badly damage the CPU, spend a bunch of turns healing, and then beat the CPU and attack node. Golbez discovers there's something more evil than him who has been manipulating him all this time, so he storms off with Fusoya to beat him up. Kane then rejoins us at level 71. What? I make sure to grab the Excalibur for the next section. Since we're on the moon, I decide to revisit Bahamut, and at level 88, Cecil utterly destroys the God of Summons. Plague is another optional boss. He has the Holy Lance, Kane's best in slot weapon. This won't help Cecil, but it's free as far as XP goes since he doesn't actually attack and we can beat him long before Doom runs out. Lunasaur, on the other hand, is not happening right now. In this 1v2, they do too much damage, easily overwhelming Cecil. So we then make a quick detour in the lunar subterrane to get the Ragnarok, Cecil's best in slot sword, but this requires fighting another boss, Dank Bahamut. First he opens up with Mega Flare, but that just misses, and then he spams Flare and just keeps missing, and then when it hits 1 out of every 4 to 5 tries, it does barely anything. Like, this is a super boss? After I finished this fight, I put down my controller and stared in disbelief about what just happened. With the Ragnarok, Cecil now does 9,999 damage to Lunasaur, beating each of them in just a couple of hits, earning us 2 ribbons, Cecil's best in slot helmet. It has slightly worse defense than the Crystal Helm, but the other stat boosts are so very worth it. Next on the chopping block for optional bosses is Dank Leviathan. While he spams Tidal Wave over and over, Cecil just shrugs it off and beats him easily. Cecil then ends up hitting level 99 soon after this fight, and because we have every piece of equipment we need and every boss is dead, there's nothing more we can do. At 9,809 HP with 99 strength, stamina, and spirit, and 71 agility, I think we're ready. Golbez and Fusoya decide enough is enough and they fight Zemus by themselves. After hitting him with the most powerful spells in the game, they meteor him out of existence. This guy didn't even get a chance to fight back, he's just dead, and with that the game is over. Actually no, unfortunately Zemus didn't like being obliterated, so he decided to obliterate Golbez and Fusoya back with his own meteor. Well, tough break. I guess I have to fight him after all. Now it's up to Cecil to fight him. Standing at just 1 HP, Cecil's forced to watch a really long and unskippable cutscene, after which I KO all of my other party members, use the crystal, and then the real battle begins. Dank Zemus has a massive HP stat, so this is going to be a really long fight. He likes to attack with Big Bang every turn or two, doing pretty high damage, but at 99 spirit and over 500 MP, with a massive HP stat, I don't think Cecil is going anywhere. Eventually Dank Zemus will switch it up with Meteor, and once he starts using Meteor, he just keeps missing and missing and missing. I didn't even know Meteor could miss. Eventually the evil Lunarian is gone for good. Well, until the after years. And that's it, the game is won.